Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Easy English Spark. Today we're starting a touching 10-chapter journey from The Faded Snapshot to The Ongoing Promise, carefully crafted to strengthen your English listening and speaking skills. In each chapter, you'll hear clear, natural narration. Feel free to pause, repeat, and shadow read to sharpen your pronunciation and build confidence. You'll not only enjoy a beautiful story about Elena and her mother, but also practice real conversational English. Grab your notebook and let's light up your English journey together. Starting now with Chapter 1, The Faded Snapshot. Chapter 1, The Faded Snapshot. I sit at my grandmother's old mahogany desk, alone except for the mellow hum of the desk lamp that casts a pool of amber light across scattered notebooks, and the half-finished cup of tea beside my elbow. In front of me, propped against a stack of weather-worn letters, rests a tarnished silver frame. It holds a single photograph, its colors softened by decades of sun and salt air. Yet the scene inside still glows with a life all its own. In that picture, I am 3, maybe 4 years old, a bundle of striped overalls and sandy curls squatting at the edge of Tidehaven Pier. My chubby hands clutch a plastic shovel as I try to build a crooked little sandcastle right on the planks, grains cascading between the cracks. Behind me, my Mother Grace kneels with her arms wrapped loosely around my waist. Her sea-green sundress billows in the wind, and loose strands of her chestnut hair whip playfully across her cheeks. She is laughing, a full, unguarded laugh that seems to sparkle in the photograph like sunlight on water. I can almost hear it ringing above the distant gull cries and the low slap of waves against weathered pilings. As I trace the outline of that laugh with my eyes, other details emerge. The scuffed blue paint on our old cooler in the background, the chalky white salt stains on Grace's canvas shoes, the way the horizon blurs into a silvery haze where ocean meets sky. I remember the smell of coconut sunscreen and cotton candy drifting from the boardwalk stalls. I remember the way my mother lifted me onto the pier railing so I could drop breadcrumb pieces to the waiting fish below, how she kept one steadying hand on my back, even when I insisted, with toddler-sized bravery, that I could balance by myself. Back then, I never saw the invisible work beneath her effortless smile. I did not notice the pre-dawn mornings when she rose quietly, kneading dough for the sweet, rolls that made our kitchen smell like heaven. I did not see her fingertips redden from scrubbing my grass-stained shorts, or hear the sigh she swallowed each night after coaxing me through my litany of bedtime stories. Childhood is selfish that way. It accepts sunshine without wondering who opens the curtains. Now, in the hush of this late hour, I place my fingertips against the cool glass and close my eyes. I imagine stepping across that threshold of time, back onto the sun-bleached boards of Tidehaven Pier. The gulls wheel overhead. The salt spray pricks my skin. Little me giggles as the sandcastle crumbles for the 10th time. Grace leans closer, her voice a soft breeze in my ear. We can build it again, darling, stronger this time. I open my eyes and focus on her face. In the photograph, those crescent-shaped laughter lines, the touch of freckles on her sun-kissed nose, the generosity in her gaze. How many times did she look at me like that while I stared stubbornly at my own small world, unaware? I think of the years that followed. School projects she stayed up late to finish gluing. Winter nights she heated towels on the radiator so I would step from my bath into warmth. The afternoons she worked double shifts yet still found the energy to watch my clumsy cartwheels, cheering as though I were an Olympic gymnast. A lump rises in my throat. I speak into the stillness, as though the photograph can hear me. Mom, I didn't understand then. I thought love was the big things. Birthday balloons, holiday fireworks, bright new toys. I never noticed the quiet ways you stitched safety around my life. The desk lamp flickers, and the silver frame catches a sudden glint, as if answering. I exhale and let the memories flow. The day she held my bicycle seat for endless laps until I pedaled straight and sure. The night storms. When I crept into her bed and she let me listen to her heartbeat until thunder felt like a lullaby. These recollections crowd the edges of my mind, tumbling one over another like seashells in a tide pool. For a moment, I imagine I can change the past. Reach into that photo and wrap my arms around my younger mother. Thank her with the vocabulary I possess now. Thank you for every small inconvenience you shouldered without complaint. Thank you for steady hands that never pushed, only guided. Thank you for laughter that taught me joy is the most reliable compass. But time is one way, and photographs are only windows. So I steady myself with a resolve as bracing as the ocean wind, to magnify the kindness she modeled, to recognize love when it arrives without ceremony, and to cherish every fleeting second before it, too, fades like the colors of an old summer. Snapshot. I lift the frame, give the glass a gentle polish with my sleeve, and set it back in the lamp's glow. Then, in a whisper meant for no one but the woman smiling forever from that seaside pier, I say, I see you now, Grace. I promise I will never stop seeing you. Chapter 2. Childhood's comfort. I want to take you back to the small clapboard house at the end of Driftwood Lane, the place that framed my entire childhood like a seashell cupping the roar of the ocean. From our front porch you could taste salt on the breeze and hear the harbor bells chiming the hour. But inside those pale blue walls, the world shrank to a gentle hum of safety my mother crafted day after day. Mornings always began with music. Before dawn's first blush slipped across the curtains, Grace would fill the kitchen with the soft shuffle of her slippers and the low crackle of the old transistor radio balanced on the windowsill. She never turned the volume past a whisper, just enough for the notes of a classic jazz guitar to mingle with the scent of rising dough. I would stumble in half asleep, rubbing my eyes, and find her already up to her elbows in flour. Without a word, she'd cut a fresh slice from the first loaf out of the oven, spread it with honey still warm from the stovetop, and place it on my favorite chipped plate covered in painted sailboats. Every bite tasted like sunshine, but I never thought to ask why a single mother working double shifts would wake an hour early, simply so her daughter could begin the day with bread that steamed in the cool dawn air. After breakfast came the ritual of the yellow raincoat. Coastal weather is whimsical. Even sunny forecasts can turn to drizzle by recess. Grace insisted I leave the house prepared, so each school day she knelt, zipped me into that butter-colored slicker, and tugged the hood until it framed my face like a sunflower. I'd complain I looked like a floating lemon, and she'd laugh, tweak my nose and say, "Better a lemon than a rain-drenched goose." Then she would walk me to Tidehaven Elementary, her hand resting lightly on my backpack strap, close enough to catch me if I tripped, distant enough to pretend I didn't still need her balance. School itself was ordinary, but lunchtime was extraordinary. Because of the parcels Grace slipped into my satchel. They were never quite the same. Some days a thermos of tomato basil soup still warm by the noon bell. Other days a spiral of turkey and cucumber tucked inside parchment, stamped with tiny hearts, in red ink. Hidden in every lunch was a surprise. A seashell, a joke on an index card, a maple leaf pressed flat between wax paper. I would line those trinkets on my desk like badges of honor, while my classmates traded factory snacks. I didn't know then that Grace scavenged the shoreline before her bus stop each morning, just to keep my collection of wonders growing. Evenings were choreographed comfort. The moment I crossed the threshold after school, an orchestration began. Kettle whistling, laundry tumbling, a faint melody of Grace humming as she folded towels. She allowed me exactly 15 minutes of cartoons, no more, no less, then guided me to the round kitchen table for homework. Grace had never gone to college, yet she owned a patience that could untangle any arithmetic knot. When I froze over long division, she breathed through every step as if exhaling calm directly into my chest. If frustration tightened my throat, she fetched 2 mugs of cocoa and suggested we ask the numbers politely. Somehow politeness made math gentler, and soon rows of figures bowed into place. Winter nights remain the clearest in my memory. The old space heater rattled like a caged cricket while wind rattled the shutters. But Grace turned darkness into theater. She draped quilts across chair backs to build a makeshift tent, placed candles in sturdy jars, and read aloud from weathered library books. Her voice gave each character a different cadence. Villains hissed, heroes boomed, sidekicks cracked jokes that made her own laughter shake the quilt walls. Outside, rain lashed the gutters, but inside, dragons were slain, planets discovered, friendships forged. When my eyelids drooped, she tucked the candle's flame beneath an upturned glass, carried me to bed, and pressed a kiss to my temple that smelled faintly of cinnamon and wax. Of course, childhood carries its share of scraped knees and fevers. I remember the autumn I caught bronchitis. 3 straight nights of coughing fits that felt like my lungs turning inside out. Grace never left my bedside. She angled her own pillow against the headboard, letting me sleep with my head on her lap, so the congestion could drain. She cooled washcloths in a basin and fed me spoonfuls of lemon ginger syrup she brewed on the stove. Between coughs, I'd whisper, "I'm sorry," and she'd answer, "For what?" "Storms blow. We weather them." I slept in the eye of her, quiet vigilance, lulled by the rhythmic sweep of her hand over my hair. Saturdays were dedicated to Grace's garden, an unruly rectangle of soil behind the tool shed where daisies tangled with tomato vines. She gave every plant a name, Miss Marigold, Sir Basil, and spoke to them like neighbors at a picket fence. I thought it silly, yet the garden bloomed long after others wilted in the salt air. When she handed me a trowel, I groaned, but she winked and said, "Dig a little and you'll find treasure." One afternoon, I uncovered a marble the color of midnight. She claimed it was dropped by the moon on its way to rise. That single marble became my favorite keepsake, a tangible reminder that Grace could turn dirt into stardust with nothing but imagination and patience. On Sundays, we visited the lighthouse perched on Coral Point. The climb up 120 iron steps left, my legs trembling, but each landing brought a new pane of stained glass, casting jewel-colored light across the spiral stairwell. At the top, Grace would lift me so I could see over the railing, letting the wind whip my braids into tangles. She'd point to a distant fishing trawler and say, "No matter how far it goes, the beam will guide it home. I realize now she was teaching me about herself. A steady light so constant I took it for granted, visible only when I bothered to look up. Night after night, year after year, Grace constructed comfort from the simplest materials: warm bread, soft quilts, stories, seashells, until security became the air I breathed. As a child, I assumed every house glowed with that same amber safety. Only after I grew older did I understand how fiercely she tended the flame, shielding it from wind and exhaustion so it would never flicker out. Looking back, the word comfort feels too small for what my mother gave me. It was more like a hidden architecture, beams of effort and rafters of resilience supporting a roof of unspoken love. I never saw the blueprint, but I lived inside the masterpiece. And now, whenever life rattles my own windows, I close my eyes and hear the faint scratch of needle on vinyl, smell bread baking, feel the steady hand on my backpack strap. Childhood's comfort, I've learned, is not a place you leave behind. It's a compass you carry forward, pointing you unerringly toward home, toward grace, no matter how rough the seas become. Chapter 3. The First Rift. I was 13 the summer the easy rhythm between my mother and me finally tripped over its own comfort and cracked. The day began like any other in Tidehaven. Blue morning haze rolling off the harbor, gulls squabbling above the fish market roofs, and the faint clang of mast lines knocking against aluminum masts. Grace packed my lunch with carrot sticks and slices of peach, kissed the crown of my head, and reminded me, "Home by 5, Lainey. The weather turns fast after sundown." I muttered an automatic yes, already plotting to stretch the limit. At T.O. school, the rumor spread that Zach Dalton had found an abandoned sailboat beached in Moonshell Cove and planned to claim it as a clubhouse before the tide carried it off again. That sounded to my restless 13-year-old mind infinitely more important than my usual after-school chores. When the last bell rang, I bolted past the yellow buses, joined a gaggle of friends on our bikes, and sped out of town, leaving the lighthouse beam to blink alone in the hazy afternoon. By 4 o'clock, red clouds were smearing the horizon. We crawled over the listing hull, laughing at every creak and imagining where we'd hang pirate flags. Someone produced a half-stale packet of marshmallows. Someone else struck a match for the fun of seeing sparks. Time folded inside itself. I forgot the clock, forgot the gulls' warning cries, forgot even the taste of salt in my own hair. At 6:43, when the September sky had already slipped to violet, I pedaled back down Driftwood Lane, wheels spitting sand. House lights glowed in neighboring windows, but ours alone remained dark. That unnerved me. Grace never forgot to flip on the porch lamp at dusk. I propped my bike against the fence, heart hammering. Crickets droned in the weeds. Inside, the kitchen smelled of supper gone cold. A pot of clam chowder rested on the stove, its surface now a cooling skin. My place was set. The wax candle melted into a lopsided sculpture of forgotten patience. I found my mother at the small dining table, elbows on the wood, fingers laced so tightly her knuckles bleached white. She didn't look up when I pushed the door. I tried breezy bravado. "Hey, Mom. Sorry, time got away from me." She lifted her eyes. Worry lay there like storm cloud shadows. That look alone pricked my bravado. "Where were you?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, yet the restraint inside it felt louder than a shout. "With friends?" I answered, forcing a shrug. "We found a boat on the beach. No big deal." She inhaled, slow and shallow, the way she did before counting to 10 in her head. "I called 3 of your friends' houses. None of the parents knew where you were. I walked the streets, Lainey. I went to the pier. The tide has been rough since noon. You promised 5. The heat of embarrassment flooded my cheeks. The memory of the overturned sailboat, of Zach daring me to climb the mast, twisted now into something guilty and sharp. But guilt quickly mutated into indignation. My friends' voices still rang in my ears, urging independence. I straightened my shoulders. "I'm not 6, Mom. I don't need a tracking device." Something in her gaze flickered. Hurt, yes, but also an exhausted sadness that scared me more than anger. "Tell me next time. A note on the fridge. A call. Anything." I grabbed a spoon from the drawer with more force than necessary, metal clanging against utensils. "You worry too much," I snapped. "I can't breathe when you hover." Her eyes widened at my tone. For a heartbeat, I expected the explosion. Grace scolding, maybe grounding me. Instead, she exhaled slowly, stood, and turned toward the sink. Her shoulders seemed to fold into themselves. She spoke with her back to me. "I saw an ambulance race toward the cove at sunset," she said quietly. "They were looking for a boy swept off the rocks. I thought—" Her sentence unraveled into silence. The spoon slipped from my hand and clattered onto the tile. The image of an emergency crew scanning the surf, of my mother's imagination inserting my face into that scene, lodged in my stomach. Yet adolescent pride still clung to me like damp clothes. "Well, I'm fine," I muttered. "You didn't." Have to panic. Grace turned around then, tears brightening her lashes but not falling. Love panics, she answered. It also trusts, but trust needs truth to stand on. Please don't kick it away. That line, gentle yet unmovable, struck like a tide, hitting seawalls. I felt both the power and the ache beneath it. But I was 13, caught between craving freedom and needing sanctuary, and I didn't know how to reconcile both. So instead of apology, I offered retreat. I stomped to my room, slammed the door, and flopped onto my bed, heartbeat ricocheting in my ears. Through the thin wall, I heard her move about the kitchen, reheating chowder, the ladle scraping cast iron. She knocked once on my door around 8, whispered, "Dinner's waiting," and walked away when I stayed mute. An hour later, the hallway light clicked off, and the house sank into hush. Sleep refused me. Guilt crept in, reshaping every memory of laughter on the boat into the picture of Grace searching the shoreline, calling my name into wind. Around midnight, I padded to the kitchen. The pot sat cold again, but a bowl and spoon rested on the table with a note. "If you're hungry, heat gently. I'll see you in the morning. Love, Mom." Even in hurt, she provided comfort. I stood there under the dim stove bulb, reading that note again and again, until the letters blurred. I was suddenly aware of every small freedom I'd ever received. Bike rides, beach days, sleepovers. Each one permitted not because she was careless, but because she trusted my promise to return, to signal I was safe. Tonight I had broken more than curfew. I had loosened a thread in the quiet weave that bound us. I warmed the chowder, its aroma rising like memory itself, and spooned it in slow penance. The house seemed to listen, absorbing my remorse. When the bowl emptied, I rinsed. It set it upside down to dry and tiptoed to my mother's door. I hovered there, hand poised, but fear of waking her kept me from knocking. Instead, I whispered through the wood, "I'm sorry, Mom. I'll do better." The hallway swallowed my confession. Morning came draped in fog. Grace was already outside, watering the garden. I walked onto the dewy grass, my shoes soaked instantly. She looked up. I forced my gaze to meet hers. Words tangled behind my teeth, but she saved me from the struggle. She opened her arm, the one not holding the hose, and after a hesitant beat, I stepped into the arc of her embrace. She smelled of wet earth and chamomile soap. We didn't speak apologies or conditions. The hug was treaty enough. Yet the rift of the previous night left a hairline fracture in my easy world, one that would widen and close again, widen and close through all the seasons of adolescence. It taught me that love could ache, trust could bruise, and freedom carried the weight of someone else's heartbeat. It was my first glimpse into the fragile architecture of relationships, the realization that even the strongest beams can creak when wind shakes the roof. That lesson, like the tide marks on Tidehaven Pier, lingered long after the storm had passed. When I pedaled to school later that morning, yellow raincoat flapping behind me like a captured flag, Grace's porch lamp shone in the fog, a signal fire, both permission and reminder. I touched the brim of my helmet in a silent salute and promised the lamp, the house, and the woman who waited there that I would learn to balance daring with care. For the first time, I felt the gravity of growing up pull against me, and I pedaled on, knowing the ocean of adolescence had only just begun to stir. Chapter 4: Lost and Reassured. The week of midterm exams arrived on a damp October tide, and Tidehaven High smelled of wet wool and oversteeped coffee. I was 14, riding the uneasy seesaw between bravado and dread, convinced my entire future hinged on a single algebra test. Our teacher, Mr. Rowe, prowled the aisles that morning, loafers squeaking on the polished linoleum while raindrops pinged the tall windows like impatient fingers. When the bell rang, he delivered the graded papers face down, a silent verdict sliding onto each desk. My hand shook. I flipped the sheet over and stared at a red-inked 42%. The number might as well have been a flare shot through fog, bright, unmistakable, and seen by everyone. My throat tightened while laughter rose somewhere. In the back row, I slipped the paper into my binder, cheeks burning, and told myself the grade was a fluke, a clerical error, a nightmare soon to dissolve when I woke. After last period, I avoided my friends, left my bike chained to the rack, and set off on foot, toward nowhere in particular. The afternoon smelled of cedar and seaweed. Gulls tumbled overhead, arguing, free of consequence. I wandered down Harbor Street, past the bait shop and the weather station, past old Mrs. Dalka's bakery where the scent of cardamom knots usually lured me inside. Today the smell only reminded me how hollow my stomach felt. I kept walking until the road ended at Breakwater Park, where gray waves gnawed at mossy rocks. I sat beneath the pavilion roof and listened to the surf pulse like a giant, indifferent clock. Inside my backpack, the failed exam seemed to radiate heat. I imagined Grace's face when she saw it, her brow pleated with worry, her mouth forming careful questions she hoped wouldn't wound me. The thought hurt more than the grade itself. I pictured her hands, always busy, smoothing pie crusts, tightening jar lids, guiding a needle through fabric. Hands that turned chores into comforts. Hands I couldn't bear to disappoint. Dusk folded over the shoreline. Streetlights flickered on, casting weak halos in the mist. A chill settled through my jacket, and logic finally nudged me. I had to go home. With every step back up Driftwood Lane, shame dragged at my heels. The porch lamp glowed, a beacon both welcoming and accusing. I opened the door as quietly as possible. The house was warm, scented with nutmeg and the faint tang of wood smoke. Grace stood at the stove, stirring something thick and golden in her favorite enameled pot. She heard the door but didn't turn, only said, "Hey, sweetheart, dinner's almost ready." Her voice carried no edge, yet my heart knocked against my ribs. I mumbled, "Hi, Mom," and tried to slip past toward my room. "Lainey?" She turned then, wooden spoon in hand, smile soft but searching. "Everything okay?" Something in her eyes, equal parts curiosity and concern, broke the dam. I burst into tears, the ugly hiccuping kind that make words impossible. I shoved the crumpled test toward her and choked. "I failed. I'm sorry. I know you stayed up helping me study, and I still blew it." She looked at the paper, then back at me. No sharp inhale, no disappointed sigh. Instead, she reached out, thumb brushing away a tear before it could slip past my cheek. "Come here," she whispered. I found myself wrapped in her arms, cheek pressed to the familiar place beneath her collarbone where I could hear her heartbeat, steady, certain, like waves against pilings. She held me until the sobs dulled to shivers. When I finally stepped back, eyes swollen, she gestured to the kitchen table. "Wash your hands. Soup's ready. It's butternut squash, the cozy kind. But my test. We'll talk after we eat," she said, ladling the silky soup into wide bowls. "That brain of yours has used up all its fuel." We sat. Rain ticked the windows. She passed warm sourdough across the table and asked about small things. Whether the new lockers still stuck. How many library books I'd finished this month. Her questions weren't diversion. They were reminders that life contained more than a single red number. When the bowls were scraped clean and the kettle began its low whistle, she folded her hands. "Okay," she said. "Let's look at this together." She spread the test between us, smoothing its creases. Red slashes marked wrong answers. Negative signs missed. Variables miscopied. Grace tapped a margin note. "See this? Your setup was right. You just carried the 3 incorrectly. That's not lack of ability. It's speed and nerves." Stared, unsure. She poured 2 mugs of chamomile, then pushed mine closer. Lainey, a grade is information, not a prophecy. It tells us where to mend, not where to end. She reached for a pencil and rewrote the first problem, guiding my hand through each step as she had years ago with long division. Her patience wrapped around the numbers until they behaved. For 2 hours, we reworked every missed question. Whenever frustration flickered in me, she broke its hold with humor, a pun about multiplying seagulls. Now there's a fine F-lock of birds. A terrible knock-knock joke about integers. I laughed despite myself, and the math unknotted. At 10 o'clock, she closed the notebook. You understand the material, she said. The next test will show that. One stumble doesn't define the dancer. I managed a wobbly smile. Thanks, Mom. She studied me a moment, then asked, May I tell you a story? I nodded. She leaned back, mug cradled in her palms. When I was 16, I failed my driving test 3 times. Parallel parking felt like wrestling a whale. I blinked. I'd never pictured Grace unsure of anything. She continued, I thought everyone would think I was hopeless, but your grandpa set 2 trash cans in the driveway and practiced with me until I could slide our rusty pickup into a space no wider than a sardine can. Passed on the 4th try, not because he scolded me, because he believed I could learn. She smiled into the steam. That's my job now. Trash can setting, belief holding. Something loosened in my chest. The shame lifted enough for breath. In its place settled a cautious confidence. We'll keep practicing? I asked. As long as it takes, she said. Tomorrow after school, 30 minutes, math and hot chocolate. I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. Sorry I worried you, I said. I thought you'd be disappointed. Her fingers curled around mine. Disappointment happens when someone quits on themselves. You didn't quit. You came home. A hush filled the kitchen, deep and reassuring. Outside, the rain had lightened to a whisper. Grace gathered the dishes. I stood to dry them. Later, as I headed down the hall, she called my name. I turned. She made a small circle over her heart with 2 fingers. Our silent shorthand for, I love you. I mirrored the motion back. For the first time all day, warmth spread through me. An inner lighthouse, steady and sure. That night I slept beneath quilts smelling faintly of lavender, the failed test folded on my desk beside fresh scratch paper and a sharpened pencil. In dreams, I walked the breakwater again, but this time Grace's lamp beamed across the water, and every misstepped equation rearranged itself into clear, shining answers. Morning arrived bright and salt clean. I rose early, practiced factoring before school, and tucked the revamped problems into my binder. My grade had not changed, but something more important had. The story I told myself about what a stumble meant. I carried that new story like a compass, its needle pointing not to failure or success, but to the reassurance that someone believed I could keep moving forward. Years later, report cards would grow longer, stakes higher, mistakes more complicated. Then misplaced integers. Yet whenever life's columns failed to balance, I still heard Grace's voice. A grade is information, not a prophecy. I would brew chamomile, pull up a chair, and begin again, lost perhaps, but always in her echo. Reassured. Chapter 5. The Summer Away. I had just turned 16 when the idea of a service learning adventure wrapped itself around my imagination like a bright ribbon I couldn't resist pulling. Our civics teacher stacked a pile of pamphlets on the windowsill. Programs that promised growth, grit, and glowing college essays. One booklet in particular caught my eye. 2 weeks building footpaths through a mountain forest, then 6 more tutoring children in a riverside village nearly 200 miles from Tidehaven. The brochure showed laughing teenagers filling wheelbarrows with gravel, evening bonfires under impossible constellations, letters of gratitude written in looping pencil by second graders. It felt, in that instant, like the very definition of significance. Something large enough to define me beyond algebra scores or JV soccer roster spots. I rushed home waving the pamphlet as though it were a winning lottery ticket. Grace was hanging freshly washed sheets on the backyard line. They snapped in the coastal wind like square white sails. I launched into a breathless sales pitch about leadership and trailblazing and how everyone else's parents had already nodded yes. Grace's brow crinkled, but she listened to every word. When I finished, she studied the glossy photographs. 8 weeks is a long time, Lainey, she said softly. We've never been apart more than a long weekend. Exactly, I blurted. That's why I need this. She didn't argue. Instead, she fetched her reading glasses and sat at the picnic table, poring over the fine print. Chaperone credentials, emergency procedures, the line about cell service dead zones. When she finally looked up, dusk was draining the sky of color. Let's sleep on it, she said. Tomorrow we'll decide together. I lay awake counting imaginary stars above the ceiling plaster, rehearsing counter-arguments for worries she hadn't yet voiced. I'd write every day. I'd take the asthma inhaler even though attacks were rare. I'd carry the laminated card with her number and the town nurses. At breakfast, Grace slid a notarized consent form across the table, signed. My heart somersaulted. I'm trusting you to be your own lighthouse out there, she said, tapping the paper. Signal me if the fog rolls too thick. Departure. July arrived in a shimmer of heat. On the morning of my leave-taking, Grace woke before the gulls, frying eggs sunny side so precise the yolks glowed like small dawns. She tucked them into sandwiches, wrapped each in brown paper, and packed them with a sprig of rosemary from her garden for courage, she claimed. When the van from North Coast Youth Expeditions coughed to a stop outside our house, she placed a tiny compass in my palm. Brass, no bigger than a quarter. If you lose your way, she whispered, trust the arrow, then trust yourself. I tried to be breezy, but my voice snagged on goodbye. Grace pressed a quick kiss to my forehead and stepped back, arms crossed against the morning chill, watching until the van turned the corner. In the rear window, I saw her raise one hand, half wave, half benediction, before Tidehaven disappeared behind a curtain of cedar trees. Week 1. The Mountain. The first leg of the trip unfolded in the Highwood Range. Peaks older than memory, their slopes stitched with switchbacks and slick with summer rain. Our job was to carve a new footpath around a landslide scar. By day 3, my shoulders ached from hauling timbers. My calves burned from hammering rebar steps into shale, and the novelty of composting toilets had faded to grim acceptance. Every evening we strung hammocks between fir trunks, aching bodies swaying like wind-tossed laundry. We passed around instant cocoa packets and compared blister counts while dusk cooled the sweat from our clothes. I wrote nightly in a pocket journal, intending to mail Grace a proper letter when we reached civilization. Dear Mom, Grace, Trail. Dust everywhere. Ate oatmeal with pine needles by accident. Built a bridge that might even hold hikers. Thinking of your sweet roll scent each time campfire smoke drifts close. One afternoon, our team leader, Simone, gathered us on a ledge overlooking a valley rippling with evergreen crowns. Look, she said, pointing at the serpentine line we'd chiseled into the hillside. From above, the path glimmered like a silver ribbon. Pride bloomed in my chest, an unfamiliar, self-forged pride. I imagined telling Grace, I did that, with my own hands. Week 3, Downriver. Mid-July delivered us, sunburned and stronger, to Cedar Bend, a cluster of clapboard houses hugging a slow green river. The village school perched on stilts just beyond the mangroves. Our task shifted from shovels to chalk sticks, We would run a summer discovery camp for 40 children ages 6 through 11. My first class, basic English phrases, crashed on the rocks of my nerves. The children stared, wary, while ceiling fans clacked overhead. I fumbled flashcards, mispronounced their names, and felt sweat pool between my shoulder blades. At break, I closed myself in the storeroom among stacks of dusty atlases and fought tears of humiliation. Why had I imagined I could teach? That night, by kerosene lantern, I unfolded Grace's compass and balanced it on my knee, watching the needle quiver, then find north. The cheap brass warmed under my thumb. I pictured her confident eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, heard her say, "Trust yourself." I exhaled. The following morning, I abandoned the script of flashcards and asked the kids to teach me river. Words in their language: waterfall, otter, fast current. Laughter thawed the classroom. By week's end, we built a floating dictionary on strips of driftwood, anchoring new words to bright drawings the way Grace once anchored my math jitters, with puns and cocoa, homesick letters. Every Sunday, a supply truck rattled in with mail. I tore open Grace's envelopes at the communal picnic table. Inside, I found not paragraphs, but snapshots of home. A pressed petunia from her garden with "It misses your sneakers" written underneath. A Polaroid of our cat sprawled on my algebra book captioned, "Proof Jerry does study." A recipe for rosemary lemonade annotated, "Share with new friends if the river heat gets fierce." I replied on the backs of topo maps and grocery receipts. Taught the kids to skip stones, used your wrist flick trick, or slept last night in a rainstorm so loud it felt like the drum line at Tidehaven football. I described the color. The river turns at dusk, mossy jade fading to obsidian, and how the children's laughter sometimes rang exactly like gull cries over our docks. Beneath the words, I confessed fears. Am I good enough at this? Do the kids sense my doubt? But I always ended with, "The compass still points home." A test of trust. During week 6, Cedar Bend flooded. Monsoon rains burst the riverbanks. Muddy water lapped at the stilts beneath the schoolhouse. Evacuation drills we'd practiced in theory snapped into urgent life. We loaded children into longboats, passing them hand to hand like precious parcels. My pulse thudded so loud I feared it would drown commands. After everyone reached higher ground, I realized my backpack, containing Grace's compass, was still on a hook inside the school. Rules said no re-entry, but instinct yanked me forward. By the time Simone's shout followed, I was waist-deep in the dim classroom, water overturning desks like toy blocks. I grabbed the pack, heart clawing my ribs, and sloshed out as a bamboo bookshelf collapsed where my head had been. Safe on the hillside, Simone's reprimand was fierce, cut short only by relief. I shook so hard I couldn't untie the boat rope. Later, alone under a tarp, I dug for the compass, miraculously dry inside its pouch. I clutched it until dawn, the metallic smell mingling with rain-wet soil. The arrow floated steady. "Trust needs truth to stand on," Grace had said. I realized the truth. I'd risked a lot for a 3-ounce keepsake because it anchored my courage. But courage, I understood now, also had to anchor itself from within. Return. August burned away floodwater damp, and our program ended with a riverbank festival. Paper lanterns drifting upstream like glowing lily pads. Children draped necklaces of marigold around our necks, chanting, "Do not forget us." I swallowed a pebble of tears. The homeward bus smelled of rucksacks and unresolved goodbyes. As Tidehaven's familiar outline rose, a tilt of the lighthouse, telephone wires swooping like lines of music. I pressed my forehead to the glass. Grace waited at the depot, hair pulled back, the same sunflower yellow cardigan she'd worn every first day of school since kindergarten. When I stepped off the bus, her arms wrapped around me so quickly the compass between us thumped against my sternum. "Welcome back, Lantern Girl," she murmured, using my childhood nickname. The scent of rosemary clung to her sleeves. On the drive home, I filled the car with stories. Of building bridges that held, of children whose river words painted worlds, of fear tasting like iron in a flooded classroom. Grace listened, one hand steady on the steering wheel, the other resting on my backpack as though feeling its weight for clues to who I had become. That night, after unpacking muddy boots and sun-bleached t-shirts, we sat on the porch steps. Cicadas hummed. I placed the brass compass on the railing between us. "I almost lost this," I admitted, "but I didn't." Grace turned it in her fingers, moonlight catching on the scratched lid. "Even if you had," she said, "you'd still have found your way." She looked at me, really looked, and I saw recognition spark like dawn across her face, as if she were watching the tide bring home a ship built from lumber she'd once carved, and hope she'd quietly stoked. I leaned my head on her shoulder, feeling taller and smaller all at once. Waves hushed against the distant pier. Above us, the same constellations the pamphlet had promised now glittered over our own roof. 8 weeks away had stretched something inside me. Resilience, yes, but also a wider channel through which her trust could flow. The compass had pointed home. The journey had pointed forward. And between those directions I understood there was room enough for both Grace's steady light and my growing horizon, each guiding the other in turn, across every season still to come. Chapter 6. College and Distance. I'd imagined the day my acceptance letter arrived would feel like launching a sky lantern, weightless, bright, and rising clean into possibility. When the thick envelope from Quillridge University finally did thump onto our doormat, I tore it open in a spray of confetti-shaped paper scraps and twirled across the kitchen linoleum. Grace laughed and hugged me so tightly that the faucet kept running behind her, forgotten, water spilling over a mound of soap suds. But 2 months later, on a muggy August morning, the sky lantern fantasy gave way to a U-Haul trailer, 3 suitcases taped with masking tape labels, and a goodbye that felt less like liftoff and more like being quietly unmoored from a dock. Move-in Saturday. Quillridge sat 4 hours inland, beyond rolling farmland and a river valley that smelled of alfalfa in late summer. Its Gothic brick, arches, and ivy-climbed bell tower looked in brochures like something straight from a filmmaker's dream of academia. In person, the campus buzzed with disorienting energy. Minivans double-parked, upper-class volunteers shouting dorm numbers, freshmen hugging pillow pets while pretending not to panic. Grace and I hauled boxes up to the third-floor room I would share with a philosophy major from Philadelphia named Rowan. Posters of vintage rock bands already papered Rowan's half of the cinder block wall. The air smelled of citrus air freshener and new carpet glue. I made my bed 3 times, sheets pulled drum tight, just to stall the goodbye. Grace unpacked a mason jar of rosemary sprigs, a dorm-friendly stand-in for the garden, she said, then pinned a Polaroid of us at the lighthouse above my desk lamp. When there was nothing left to arrange, she smoothed invisible wrinkles from my comforter, tucked a $20 bill into my hoodie pocket for emergency cocoa, and pulled me into her arms. I felt absurdly like the 5-year-old who'd once hidden behind her skirt on the first day of kindergarten. She whispered, "Your horizon is wide, but call when the view gets foggy." I nodded, throat clogged, and watched from the 3rd floor window as our battered station wagon merged into the river of departing parents. Its taillights flickered out of sight, and suddenly the hallway behind me echoed with the metallic slam of unfamiliar doors. The freshman blur. Orientation week zoomed past in a montage of name tag stickers, campus scavenger hunts, and midnight pizza lines. I learned 300 faces, but remembered maybe 20 names. Between Biology 101 labs and Intro to Global History discussion sections, I texted Grace quick snapshots. The bell tower lit gold at sunset, the world map mural outside. The library, Rowan balancing upside down in a beanbag chair. She replied with photos of Tidehaven sunsets and a daily lineup of the cat's increasingly ridiculous nap poses. Classes, however, struck with riptide force. My high school straight-A swagger dissolved beneath the deluge of dense syllabi, 8-page reading list per night. Problem sets that turned theorems into alien riddles. In the first month, I racked up 2 B- and 1 C on lab reports. Each grade slip a sting of déjà vu to that algebra test years before. Grace phoned every Sunday evening at 7. I'd perch on a limestone bench near the duck pond. Earbuds. In pretending, as freshmen do, to be effortlessly thriving. But she heard the tightness in my laugh, the way I exhaled through teeth. "How's the workload, Lantern Girl?" she asked. "Manageable," I lied, flipping notebook pages still blank. She countered with gentle questions. "Are you sleeping? Drinking water? Using that campus tutoring center you circled in the brochure?" I parried until the conversation shifted to her garden's late-bloom zinnias. Each call ended with our silent two-finger gesture over the heart, though she couldn't see mine through the phone. Radio silenced. October arrived with maples blazing scarlet and midterms swallowed. Me whole? I stopped answering Sunday calls, first out of frantic study, then, ashamed of the silence, out of avoidance. I convinced myself Grace must be busy too. Substitute shifts at the elementary school, harvest festival bake sales, her endless list of neighborly errands. One Wednesday night, rain needled the dorm windows while I pounded futilely at a chemistry problem set. Rowan snored beneath noise-canceling headphones. Highlighter streaks blurred on the page. Without thinking, I opened my desk drawer, fished out the brass compass Grace had once gifted me, and flicked the lid. North quivered steady beneath the dim LED lamp. A notification pinged on my laptop, an email from Grace, subject line simply "Moon Tonight." Inside, a single sentence. "Step outside and look at the moon. I'll be looking too." Attached was a photo of the Tidehaven lighthouse beam brushing a pale, nearly full orb. I shoved away from the desk, patted down 3 flights of stairs, and burst into the drizzle. Clouds shredded just enough to reveal the same ghost-white disk hovering above Quillridge's bell tower. Rain dotted my cheeks like tears not yet shed. I pulled out my phone and, hands shaking, called. She answered on the first ring. Neither of us spoke for a long breath. The distance between bell tower and seaside porch collapsed into shared moonlight. "I'm sorry," I managed. "I thought if I sounded stressed you'd worry." She chuckled, soft and wry. "Lainey, I worry when you don't sound stressed. It's my hobby." Then quieter. "Talk to me." Words tumbled out. Grades, imposter syndrome, dorm noise at 2 a.m., the professor who spoke like a runaway freight train. She listened, not fixing, just anchoring. Finally, she said, "Remember, information, not prophecy. A professor's red pen isn't the oracle at Delphi." We stayed on the line until rain soaked my hair and the library clock told midnight. I went inside lighter, compass tucked back over my heart. Care package season. 2 days later, the resident hall. Mail clerk handed me a box plastered with doodle stickers. Cartoon seagulls, a lighthouse, a grinning pie symbol. Inside, lavender honey cookies sealed in wax paper, 3 pairs of wool socks, laundry backlog insurance, a crocheted mug sleeve she'd made during PTA meetings, and a note. "Dear Lantern Girl, midterms are just waypoints, not the whole. Map. Eat, hydrate, stretch. Love you bigger than the bay." Mom Rowan and I demolished the cookies during a 1 a.m. flashcard binge. Sugar and lavender lingered on the air like late summer Tidehaven nights. First homecoming. Thanksgiving break arrived draped in fog. I dozed through the bus ride and woke to cedar silhouettes and the salty tang of low tide. Grace waited at the depot holding a thermos emblazoned with Quill Ridge, steam curling into the chill. "Wanted your travel mug to actually travel," she teased, then crushed me in an embrace that smelled of rosemary and wood smoke. Home looked smaller, but also more golden, as if the walls had soaked up extra sunlight while I was gone. Grace's cat gave a disdainful chirp at my suitcase, but later curled at my feet all night as if erasing the months apart. Over mashed potatoes and pumpkin pie, she asked gentle questions. Favorite professor so far? What Rowan's major was like? Whether campus trees turned as crimson as our local sumacs. She never mentioned grades. I volunteered them anyway. 1 B+, 2 solid A's after relentless tutoring center sessions. Her eyes crinkled. "See? North has many roads." That weekend we walked the beach. I ranted about roommate quirks. She about the school board's latest budget fiasco. Conversation flowed unbroken, like we'd merely paused the tape in August and now pressed play. Yet I noticed new things. The silver threading her hair at the temples, the way she rubbed her wrist after carrying groceries, the deeper hush in the house once I left a room. Distance revealed details, closeness once blurred. Crisis Week. Back. At Quillridge in December, finals loomed like cliff faces. A statistics project consumed every waking hour. The code kept crashing. My group mates bickered. One night, after the third compile failure, panic spun wild. Heart racing, hands cold, a roar in my ears. I stumbled outside, phone clutched but unsure whom to call at 2 a.m. Snow sifted under the street lamps. Instinct guided my thumb. Speed dial. Mom. She answered groggy but alert. I sobbed out the cascade of errors, the fear of tanking my GPA, the doubt that I even belonged. She listened until my breath slowed, then said, "Lainey, find a window." I pressed my forehead to the frosted glass of the student center. "See? The snowflakes?" she asked. "Each one lands, melts, disappears. But while it falls, it's perfect. Let this moment be just a flake. Brief, not the blizzard." She coached me through square breathing. 4 counts in, 4 hold, 4 out. My pulse steadied. "Tomorrow," she said, "email your TA, book office hours, and sleep now. The code will wait." It did. 2 days later, the project ran perfectly. We earned an A-. I mailed Grace a printout of the green compilation successful message, circled in highlighter. She taped it to the fridge like kindergarten art. Winter break epiphany. December snow followed me home. Grace and I baked gingerbread, rebuilt the jigsaw lighthouse puzzle, watched classic movies until 1 a.m. One night, sipping cocoa, I caught her studying me with a thoughtful tilt. "What?" I asked. "You've changed," she said. "Not in a way that moves you farther. More like more facets in the same gem." I thought of mountain switchbacks, river floods, lab reports, compiled code. "You polished a lot of those facets first," I answered. She shrugged. "Mothers are only the cloth. Children choose how bright to shine." Snow blurred the window. Inside, the house felt exactly the size it needed to be. Big enough to hold separate lives, close enough to let their heartbeats echo. Carrying north forward. When spring semester began, I returned to Quillridge armed with fresh notebooks, renewed confidence, and a weekly video call date with Grace set in stone. Sunday nights, 7 p.m., no excuses. We named them moon meetings, regardless of weather. The distance remained, miles on a map, months on the academic calendar. But it was no longer a chasm. It was a channel, water flowing both ways. Her letters still smelled of rosemary. My emails now contained more than breezy anecdotes. We traded recipes, study hacks, and small victories. Sometimes, walking across campus at dusk, I'd pause to check the compass in my coat pocket. Its arrow pointed north, but I understood at last. The direction mattered less than the knowing someone back home believed I could read any map. Grace's faith had become my own internal lodestar, steady, portable, brighter than any bell tower. Floodlight College would stretch into internships, late-night debates, heartbreaks, and discoveries I couldn't yet name. Distance would fluctuate, some days a whisper, others a mountain pass. But the line between Tidehaven's porch lamp and Quill Ridge's library glow was permanently lit, a filament of trust carrying current both ways. And as semesters unfurled, I learned to live like the compass itself, pivot when necessary, settle when possible, always realign to the quiet true north of a mother's unwavering love. Chapter 7. A Daughter's Gift. The summer after my sophomore year, I landed a paid internship at Whitmore and Tate Design Studio, a converted textile mill that smelled of sawdust, espresso, and possibility. On my first morning, the senior architect slapped a stack of concept sketches on my desk and said, "Welcome to the real world, kiddo." The real world paid exactly $15 an hour, hardly a fortune, but to me, it felt like winning the lottery. I logged every minute in a tiny ledger tucked behind my ID badge. Each penciled total glowed like a firefly, proof that the skills Grace had nurtured were now currency. For 8 sticky weeks, I commuted on the 6:07 a.m. tram, tapped renderings until my wrists tingled, learned the quiet power of asking follow-up questions. Every Friday, direct deposit pulsed into my brand new checking account. I resisted splurging on cafe lunches, learned to brew coffee in the office kitchenette, and slipped the dollars I saved into an envelope labeled "For Grace." By August, the envelope was thick enough to feel like a secret. The search. I knew exactly what I wanted to buy. A handcrafted teapot worthy of my mother's nightly ritual. Since I could remember, Grace welcomed each evening with a pot of chamomile, porcelain speckled from age, lid chipped during some forgotten earthquake. Of dishes. The way she cradled that pot, you'd think it was blown from moonlight. "Tea makes space for breath," she always said. My gift had to honor that space. So on a blistering Saturday, I boarded a rattling bus to Harbor Row, where local artisans set up stalls along cobblestone alleys. Glassblowers coaxed molten suns into vases. Carpenters sanded driftwood into wave-shaped bowls. I wandered past booths of watercolor prints and sea salt candles, my envelope growing damp in my palm. Near the end of the market stood a quiet table draped in indigo linen. Atop it rested teapots, each one unique, some squat and whimsical, others elegant with elongated spouts like calligraphy strokes. The potter, Miss Aldrich, greeted me with clay-streaked hands. When I explained my quest, she gestured to a pot half hidden behind a row of mugs. "Try this," she said. It was coastal sky blue, fading into sandy cream near the base, as if the shoreline itself had been poured into ceramic. Tiny rosemary sprigs, Grace's emblem, were etched around the rim, glazed in forest green. The lid fit with a satisfying click, and inside, the unglazed clay whispered heat-holding promises. My breath caught. Price tag, $150. Almost every bill in my envelope. Worth it, I murmured, thinking of each lavender honey. Evening Grace brewed away her fatigue. I paid in cash, watching my envelope empty like a tide receding, and asked Ms. Aldrich to wrap the teapot in brown paper, twine, and a sprig of dried rosemary. The homecoming. I arrived in Tidehaven on a late August afternoon, backpack slung over, one shoulder, teapot cradled in both arms like a newborn comet. Grace met me at the depot, waving with the same sunflower warm cardigan she'd worn on my first day of college. We drove home, radio low, trading snippets. Her garden's war against slugs. My discovery that printers jam precisely when deadlines loom. In the kitchen, evening sun filtered through lace curtains, painting dappled maps across the wood floor. I placed the wrapped bundle on the table. "Close your eyes," I said. She raised an eyebrow, but obeyed. Steam from a kettle hissed in the background. Perfect timing. Grace untied the twine. The rosemary sprig fell into her palm, releasing its scent. She peeled back the paper, slow, as if unwrapping memory itself. When the teapot emerged, the room seemed to inhale with us. Light caught the glaze, turning the blue deeper, the cream warmer. For a heartbeat, she said nothing. Then, "Lainey?" Her thumb traced the etched rosemary. "It's beautiful." Tears welled, but she blinked them clear, laughter and awe tangled in her voice. "How did you—" "First paycheck," I said, cheeks burning with a pride, more fragile than porcelain. "I wanted you to have something as steady as your tea ritual, something just yours." She set the pot gently on a trivet, then pulled me into a hug that smelled of citrus soap and garden earth. "Sweetheart, you didn't need to spend your savings on me." "I know," I answered. "That's why I did." The first pour. We brewed chamomile immediately. Grace measured loose blossoms into the new pot, poured boiling water, and closed the lid. The ceramic held heat like a promise. We waited the requisite 4 minutes, silence laced with anticipation, before she filled 2 cups. The tea tasted faintly of the sea breeze and rosemary, or maybe that was imagination steeped in gratitude. As we sipped, she told stories of her first paycheck at 19, a grocery store clerk's wages spent on a second-hand typewriter so she could take night classes. I pictured her tapping keys under a single bulb while the same ocean wind rattled old window panes. "Your gift," she said, hands wrapped around her cup, "reminds me of mine, but grander because it came from you." That night, I lay in my childhood room, walls still hung with faded postcards, and listened to the familiar symphony, distant waves, floorboards sighing, Grace rinsing cups in the sink. A soft clink told me she was placing the teapot on the drying rack, its new home. Ripples through time. Over the months that followed, the teapot became a silent participant in our calls. Whenever Grace positioned her phone on the kitchen counter, I'd spot its ocean sky hue in the background, steam curling from the spout. She reported its quirks, how it whistled, almost imperceptibly, when water reached the perfect steeping temperature. How the lid refused to chip even when she knocked it against the faucet. "Sturdy thing, must take after its giver," she joked. The pot also gathered stories beyond my sight. Neighborhood book club debates fueled by Earl Grey. Winter evenings when Grace filled it with ginger tea for flu-ridden neighbors. Quiet dawns when she poured herself a cup before heading to substitute teach, inhaling rosemary steam in the hush. One April weekend, I surprised her with a visit. Saturday dawn found us sitting on the porch, sea mist curling around the railing. The teapot rested between us on a wicker tray. Grace poured, then produced an envelope. Inside, a check for $200, my birthday gift, she said, winkingly. Labeled seed money. I laughed. "Mom, you didn't have to." "I know," she echoed. "That's why I did." "Pass it forward, lantern girl." The phrase glowed between us. Pass it forward. I pictured future gifts spiraling outward. Teapots, scholarships, words of reassurance at 2 a.m. I felt the quiet architecture of her love once more, beams of patience holding up a roof of trust, and realized I had begun adding my own wings to that house, clay-glazed, rosemary-scented, capable of sheltering others. As morning sunlight warmed the porch, I lifted my cup in a toast. "To sturdy things," I said. Grace clinked hers against mine. "And to the hearts that pour them." Chapter 8. Unspoken Sorrows. I used to think a mother's life was an open book, a volume I'd memorized simply by living in its pages. After all, Grace narrated each chapter of my childhood with patient clarity. Why kites fly, how yeast wakes bread, when cedar branches need pruning. But the summer after my junior year, I discovered whole paragraphs written in invisible ink. Sorrows she carried so quietly they left almost no trace, except in the soft places a daughter learns to notice only when she finally slows down and looks. A funeral. She didn't attend. The first clue arrived one hot June morning. I was home for a long weekend, lured by the promise of beach weather and Grace's lemon blueberry scones. As I padded into the kitchen, I caught her at the landline. Voice low, tracing rings on the tablecloth with one finger. "Thank you for calling," she murmured, then paused a long time. "No, I won't be able to make the trip." She hung up and smiled when she saw me, but her eyes were rimmed in red. "Everything okay?" I asked. She waved off the question. "Just a distant cousin's memorial. Too far, that's all." Then she pivoted. Scones, picnic plans, how high the hollyhocks had grown. I let the topic drop, believing her ease, yet the phone call lingered in the air like the echo of a closed door. That afternoon we drove to Gull Point for a swim. Grace packed sandwiches but forgot to add the mustard, an oversight so unlike her. Meticulous lunchcraft that I finally risked pressing. "Which cousin passed away?" Grace adjusted the rearview mirror, although the angle was fine. "Ella," she said. "We were close when we were little, before life carried us different directions." Her voice faltered on before, but she sealed the sentence with a gentle finality that warned me not to pry. On the sand, she dozed beneath a straw hat while I read a novel. Yet several times I noticed her face tilted toward the surf, expression distant, as though listening for a name carried on the waves. The cedar chest. 2 nights later, unable to sleep, I wandered to the attic in search of an old painting smock. The attic smelled of cedar and dust motes spinning in moonlight. Against the far wall rested a cedar chest I'd never seen open. Its lid bowed slightly, as though guarding secrets. I hesitated, then lifted it. Inside lay layers of neatly folded fabric. Lace collars, moth-nibbled baby blankets, and at the very bottom, a stack of letters bound with green ribbon brittle from sun. Each envelope bore the looping script of Ella, Davenport. Some were postmarked decades back, others only last spring. Grace had kept them all, but none were opened. My throat tightened. I returned the stack and closed the lid, uneasy at trespass, yet more uneasy at the unanswered messages. Why hadn't she read them? Why decline the funeral? The questions felt heavy as the cedar chest itself. Garden at dusk. The next evening, I joined Grace in the backyard where twilight blurred the edges of rose petals. She was kneeling, coaxing a drooping tomato vine onto a wooden stake. I crouched beside her, fingers fiddling with the spool of twine. "Mom?" I began, voice hushed. "Were you and Ella estranged?" She paused, hands resting in the soil, and exhaled slowly. Estranged is such a hard-edged word. Let's call it tangled. I waited. Crickets started their chorus. Finally, she tugged the vine upright and spoke. "Ella and I grew up like twin saplings, her house only 2 yards away. We planned to backpack Europe after high school, open a seaside cafe, write a book of coastal ghost stories. Big, bright schemes." She smiled at the memory, then shook her head. "But she moved to the city. I stayed, and distance baked misunderstandings into something brittle. We wrote for years, then less, then not at all. Whenever her envelopes arrived, I couldn't bear the weight of what I hadn't said, so I left them sealed." She stood brushing dirt from her knees. "I loved her, and I let silence win." I touched her arm. "You can still read her words now." She met my eyes, tears reflecting the porch light. "I'm scared they're full of forgiveness I don't deserve, or anger that's my doing. Either way, I wasn't brave soon enough." A hush settled over the garden. Fireflies blinked between dark leaves. For the first time, I sensed how deep regret could burrow, quiet as roots beneath topsoil. The Lost Sketchbook. The second clue slipped out in August while we cleared the attic for storm roof repairs. Amid boxes of holiday ornaments, I uncovered a charcoal sketchbook, cover worn, spine cracked. Inside bloomed portraits of places I knew only in postcards: the Ponte Vecchio, Montmartre cafes, Greek temples beneath summer skies. Every page pulsed with Grace's unmistakable line work, shading so alive I could almost smell espresso and ancient stone. "Mom, these are yours," I gasped. She climbed the ladder, squinting in the attic's dim glow, and laughed softly. "I drew those at 20. Thought I'd fill 100 volumes while traveling." She flipped pages with tender fingertips. "But tuition funds ran dry. Family needed help. I promised myself I'd go later." She closed the sketchbook. later, never stitched itself to a date. Her shrug was light, but her eyes lingered on a half-finished sketch of the Eiffel Tower scaffolded in scaffolding. The dream interrupted mid-stroke. I realized the teapot gift, though dear to her, could never repay ambitions quietly boxed away. Unspoken. Sorrows revealed. I returned to campus that fall carrying more than textbooks. Grace's unheard griefs rustled at the edges of my attention. The cousins' letters unopened, the Europe of sketchbooks untouched, the backpacking cafe girls separated by choices and chance. I began calling nightly, short check-ins that sometimes stretched past midnight. One October evening, she confessed her wrist pain was worsening. The school district's demand for substitute teachers left her grading papers until her joints numbed. "I'm fine, really," she said. But fine, I'd learned, could mask fatigue deeper than bone. Finals consumed me until December. When I finally stepped off the holiday bus, Grace's smile looked thinner, her cardigan hanging looser at the shoulders. Yet supper steamed, decorations twinkled. She would not let burdens overshadow homecoming. That night, after she slept, I crept again to the attic. I liberated Ella's bundle of letters and the sketchbook, carried them to my room, and spent hours reading and planning. Ella's words overflowed with warmth, invitations to city art shows, tales of travels she wished they'd shared, repeated, "Please visit Gracie. The guest room waits." The last letter ended, "If distance is a moat, know my drawbridge is down." A gulf of silence had swallowed those bridges, but maybe I could lay new planks. A belated journey. January dawned, clear and frigid. Before returning to college, I sat across from Grace at the kitchen table, compass between us, letters spread like fragile sails of paper. I read them, I confessed, before she could protest. She missed you. She forgave you without you even asking. Grace studied her tea, shoulders trembling. I took her hand. "It's not too late to answer." Tears slipped free. "I don't even know what I'd say." Say you love her stories. Say you're sorry the silence grew. Say thank you for waiting. I slid a ticket packet across the table. 2 train passes, Tidehaven to the city. First weekend of spring break. I'll go with you. We can visit her grave together, bring flowers, and after, we'll take the overnight to Paris. You'll fill that sketchbook." She gasped, half laughter, half sob. "Lainey, I can't let you use your savings. It's internship money round 2. I smiled. and a scholarship stipend. You once told me to pass forward sturdy things. Courage is sturdy. Grace pressed her palm to the sketchbook cover as though checking a pulse. I'm terrified. We'll be terrified together, I said. Epilogue of the chapter. In March, suitcase wheels clicked along station tiles, echoing like the heartbeat of mended years. We carried dried rosemary and Ella's letters, now unbound. Grace's eyes shone river bright as the train pulled away from Tidehaven, porch lamps shrinking to sparks in the dusk. I watched her open the sketchbook, pencil poised. The first stroke trembled, the second found steadiness. Outside, winter fields blurred into motion. Inside, unspoken sorrows finally found their voice, etched in graphite, sealed in forgiveness, carried forward on the rails of a brand new page. Chapter 9. Reversed Roles. I used to believe the hinge between youth and age would squeak loudly, an unmistakable creak that shouted, "Now things change." But when the roles between Grace and me finally reversed, the turning was so gentle I almost missed it, like a door swinging shut on oiled hinges. Small signs. It started with a faint tremor in her handwriting. Birthday cards that once bore sweeping cursive now fluttered with hesitant loops. Then came the dropped skillet, cast iron colliding with tile, followed by her sheepish laugh and a muttered, "Butterfingers." I worried, suggested a checkup. She waved me off. "Just tired bones, lantern girl." But tired bones became stiff joints, then short breaths when she carried groceries. One afternoon I found her on the porch steps, rubbing her chest. She blamed the humidity. I pressed for a doctor's visit, and for the first time she didn't argue. The cardiologist's verdict: atrial fibrillation, manageable with medication but demanding new routines, morning pills, evening blood pressure logs, regular monitoring. Grace accepted the news with her trademark half-smile. But that night I heard her in the kitchen long after midnight, cupboards opening and shutting as though she were searching for something she'd misplaced, perhaps the illusion of unbreakable strength. The fall. 2 weeks later, a storm slicked Driftwood Lane. Grace slipped on the back porch step, fracturing her hip. The phone call yanked me out of a design review meeting 300 miles away. Hours later, I was speeding down a rain-glazed highway, wipers beating fast as my pulse. At the hospital, Grace looked smaller in the bed than I'd ever seen. White hair fanned across the pillow like sea foam. She tried to lighten the moment. "Tell the surgeon to install rocket boosters while he's in there." But when she reached for her teacup, Her hand shook. Post-surgery, the orthopedist listed instructions. No stairs for weeks, walker use, physical therapy, low-sodium diet. For the heart. I filled a notebook with bullet points while Grace pretended to nap. Eyes slitted toward the window where gulls wheeled against a pewter sky. The move home. I took family leave from the studio and relocated to Tidehaven, setting up a makeshift workstation at Grace's dining room table. Furniture shifted like chess pieces. We installed grab bars in the bathroom, raised the armchair on blocks, placed night lights along the hallway, the same path I'd once padded at age 5 to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms. The first morning home, she tried to brew her own chamomile. I caught her balancing on one crutch, the kettle steaming dangerously. I guided her back to the living room recliner, heart pounding harder than the kettle whistle. She sighed, annoyance clouding her blue-gray eyes. I hate feeling fragile, she muttered. I know, I said, arranging pillows the way she used to tuck quilts around my feverish limbs. But even lighthouses need maintenance. New rituals. Our days found a rhythm. I set alarms, 6 a.m. heart meds, 10 a.m. physical therapy stretches, noon garden strolls with the walker, 4 p.m. blood pressure check, 8 p.m. anticoagulant. I labeled a pill organizer with compass directions instead of weekdays, N-N-E-E, turning. Medication into navigation, a quiet nod to the brass compass she once gave me. Grace's teapot stayed in service. I poured instead of her, inhaling the rosemary-tinged steam that once rose under her watchful eye. Sometimes she asked to hold the pot just to feel its familiar weight. Other times she stared at her hands, flexing fingers as though they belonged to someone else. Evenings we sat on the porch where she'd walked me through algebra, now swapping roles. I recited doctor's jargon, PT-INR ratios, arrhythmia triggers, while she listened, head tilted, the student at last. Gulls cried overhead, their silhouettes shrinking with the tide. Hidden frustrations. Caregiving was love, but love wrestled with impatience. I caught myself sighing when she took too long with the walker, snapping when she insisted on folding. Laundry. Guilt followed like a shadow. One night, exhausted, I burned dinner and burst into tears. Grace reached for my hand. Lainey, superheroes are allowed bad days. I laughed wetly. You're calling me a superhero? You taught me every trick I know. She squeezed my fingers. Then trust the training. We shared scorched macaroni, laughing at the crunch. Breakthrough. Progress came in centimeters. 1 extra stare, 1 fewer grimace. The physical therapist praised her determination. Grace credited my drill sergeant jeans, conveniently forgetting she'd planted them decades earlier. One afternoon, while pruning her rose bushes, she on a garden stool, I standing guard, she confessed what hurt most wasn't pain but dependence. "When I carried you," she said, trimming a wilted bloom, "I felt necessary. Now I'm cargo." I knelt in the soil, dirt cooling my knees. "Cargo? No, you're the map. I'm just steering until your hand's steady." I pointed to new buds on the vine. "See? Even roses rest before they bloom again." Tears glimmered in her lashes, but she smiled. "Then water me, Captain." The first independent steps. By autumn's edge, she exchanged the walker for a cane-painted lighthouse red. We celebrated with a slow walk to the pier. Each step tapped wood planks, echoing her early morning footsteps from my childhood. At the rail we watched fishing boats crawl across the horizon. Wind tangled her silver hair. "Feels strange," she whispered. "The world taller after months indoors." I wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Welcome back to the crow's nest. Role sharing, not reversal." Care gradually shifted from full-time vigilance to partnership. She measured spices while I stirred soup. I washed dishes while she wiped. Counters. Every task became duet. She even resumed sketching. This time our backyard raised beds, rebuilt so she could garden without bending. One crisp evening I found her alone at the dining room table, pen moving across a sheet of stationery. She sealed the envelope, handed it to me. "Life insurance beneficiary update," she said, "and a power of attorney form, just in case." Fear prickled, but I nodded. Trust had edges. Accepting them was its final proof. Gratitude turned back. On the anniversary of her surgery, Grace insisted on cooking dinner, her famous spinach ricotta pie. She shooed me to the porch where a package waited, a leather architect's portfolio, my initials debossed in gold. "Thank you for carrying me," she said, arms steady as she presented it. "May it carry your blueprints for a long, bright future." I opened the portfolio. Inside lay her newest sketch, drawn from the porch that very morning. Me kneeling beside rose bushes, compass necklace catching sun. At the bottom she'd written, "Care runs both directions." Tears blurred the graphite lines. I gathered her into a hug, careful of her healing hip, and realized the roles hadn't so much reversed as begun to spin. 2 points on a compass, revolving. each sometimes north, sometimes south, but always tethered by the same unbroken circle. That night, when I tucked a quilt around her, she whispered our old benediction. Love you bigger than the bay. I pressed the quilt's edge, lantern, light flickering across the room, and answered, Rest, Mom. The beacon's lit. I'll keep watch till morning. Chapter 10. The Ongoing Promise. Dawn spreads across Tidehaven with the hush of a turning page, pink light brushing clapboard houses, gulls looping lazy ellipses over the harbor. I stand on the back porch steps tying the laces of my work boots, breathing in rosemary and salt. Inside, a kettle begins its low whistle. That sound, sharp, insistent, familiar as pulse, starts every morning now, a ritual Grace and I guard like a secret handshake. She emerges from the kitchen wearing her lighthouse red cane like a badge, teapot balanced in her other hand. Years have etched themselves onto her face the way tides etch stone, softening edges but revealing a deeper grain. Yet the smile she gives me is bright enough to scatter shadows. Fuel before you conquer the world, she says, pouring chamomile into 2 enamel mugs. Steam curls between us, scented with dried apple slices, her latest edition. I sit beside her on the porch glider. We sip in companionable silence, watching sun rays skim the tops of tomato vines. A blue jay lands on the high rail, eyeing crumbs from last night's pie crust. Grace taps her cane in greeting. The bird flicks its tail, unafraid. The quiet is so complete I can hear the soft click of the compass pendant at my throat as it sways, a reminder of the promise that threads through every hour of my life. Carry her kindness forward, building outward, rooted inward. By 8 o'clock, I'm driving to the construction site of Tidehaven's new community arts center, my first lead architect project. The design grew out of Grace's sketchbook, high windows angled to catch sea light, cedar siding that silvers like driftwood, a roof line echoing gull wings. She called it a building that looks like it breathes. I call it proof that ordinary love can calcify into something you can actually walk inside. Most afternoons, after reviewing blueprints and coaxing joists into position, I return to Grace. Therapy appointments are spaced farther apart now. Her hip mended, her heartbeat steady beneath a quilt of medications. But there are new hurdles, foggy words that sometimes slip from her grasp, nights when exhaustion clings like wet sand. On those evenings, I read aloud from her favorite travel, essays describing markets she once dreamed of visiting. She closes her eyes, listening, fingertips tracing invisible lines on the armrest, as if still sketching the world into being. An invitation and a choice. One spring morning, an email lands in my inbox like a stone in calm water. Breyer and Finch. Urban design in Seattle offers me a senior position. Double my salary, global projects, groundbreaking sustainability research. It's the opportunity I've chased since drafting dollhouse floor plans on Grace's kitchen tiles. Yet the prospect tangles with guilt. Seattle is 2,000 miles and 3 time zones away. That night, I paced the living room rehearsing ways to decline without regret. Grace snaps her sketchbook shut. "You've been moon orbit restless all evening," she says. "Out with it." I hand her the printed offer, waiting for disappointment to darken her features. Instead, pride flares like a lighthouse beam. "Lainey, this is brilliant. But you, doctor visits, garden, the stairs." She sets her palm on my arm. "You taught me that help is a duet. We'll compose new harmonies." She lists solutions faster than I can protest. Part-time home health aide, meal deliveries, a neighbor's son eager to mow lawns, video calls pinned to every mealtime, and direct flights run daily, she adds. "I checked after your second pacing lap." I laugh, half relieved, half terrified. "You're really okay with this?" Grace lifts the brass compass from my neck, studies the arrow. "A compass is useless if you ignore true north. Go, learn, bring the light back." The decision is made over chamomile. We toast. Porcelain clinks echoing bigger dreams. The digital porch light. The month before I move, we transform the house into a fortress of convenience. We program the stove to chime reminders, install a voice-activated assistant that can call me with one word, mount a video doorbell so I can wave at Grace each evening regardless of coastlines. She teases that she feels like a ship rigged with too many ropes. I counter that every rope is a lifeline. On departure day, dawn paints the sky a hopeful mauve. Grace hands me a package no bigger than a playing card deck. "Open it when you're homesick," she says, eyes glistening but steady. We hug in the driveway until the taxi driver coughs politely. The rear-view mirror shows her shrinking figure, cane raised in salute, porch light glowing through the sun, is already up. New rhythms, old threads. Seattle greets me with cedar forests and glass towers. Days blur into site surveys and zoning meetings. Nights bloom with neon and coffeehouse jazz. Yet at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Tidehaven, my phone chirps and Grace's face fills the screen, cheeks lit by the seaside sunset. We cook together. my garlic sizzling while she seasons soup across the continent. When she's tired, she simply points the camera at the teapot, and I watch steam ribbon upward, the digital equivalent of sitting at her table inhaling apple chamomile comfort. One evening, her hand trembles, the screen tilts, instinct flares. Within minutes, I've called the local aide and the neighbor. It's only a dizzy spell, but the scare etches deeper resolve. Distance is a measurement, not a barrier. The gift of stone and sky. Winter arrives smelling of salt and fir. My art center back home is nearly complete. Satellite photos and progress emails show cedar siding catching snow like powdered sugar. I ask my firm for 2 weeks off to oversee the dedication. Grace meets me at Tidehaven Station, bundled in her lighthouse red coat. Her cane is swapped for a trekking pole sporting a carved gull on the handle, a gift from her physical therapist to celebrate walking 5 miles unaided. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, she stands beside me, hand clasping mine while townspeople stream through glass doors. Children gasp at the sun-dappled atrium. Musicians test acoustics that bounce notes off cedar beams. Grace's eyes shimmer. "You built a breathing building indeed," she says. After the speeches, she pulls me aside and presses the small package she gave me months earlier back into my hand. Time to open. Inside rests a simple silver ring etched with the compass design. North arrow inlaid with a sliver of lapis. Engraved inside, "Keep promising." I slip it on, feeling metal warm to skin, a circle without start or end. Weathering the inevitable time, indifferent to vows, keeps moving. Grace's knees stiffen, reading glasses thicken. But our rituals adapt. On video calls, I project architectural models. She critiques window placements with artist's precision. I snail mail her swatches of sustainable insulation. She paints watercolors on the envelope's blank sides and returns them as wall art for my office. One November, she catches pneumonia. I reach the hospital in 16 sleepless hours, fearing the worst. Tubes hiss, monitors beep. Yet when her eyes open, they focus on the compass ring. She manages a raspy whisper. "North still straight?" I nod, tears spilling. She squeezes my fingers, a frail but unbroken grip. Recovery is slow, but she reclaims mornings on the porch by spring. She no longer gardens kneeling. Instead, raised. Planters let her tend marigolds while seated. I kneel to pull weeds, upside-down rolls woven into the soil. Passing the lantern. Years glide like gull wings. I marry. My partner Mia adores Grace's stories. Soon a new heartbeat enters the narrative, our daughter Clara. At 6 months old, Clara beams whenever my phone connects to Grace's porch. Great Gran, we teach her to say, though Clara's version sounds like Gree-gra. On Clara's first birthday, we return to Tidehaven. Grace, hair now a soft cloud, sits in a rocker holding the child who bears her eyes. She lifts the brass compass chain from my neck, slips it over Clara's tiny head. One day you'll pass this on, Grace tells her, voice a trembling breeze. North is love you carry, Clara gurgles, fingers smearing drool on the tarnished lid. The symbolism outlives the spit. The promise articulated. One starlit evening, after Clara sleeps, Grace and I sit by the lighthouse overlook, blankets tucked around our legs. Waves beat a steady metronome against the rocks. She clears her throat, brittle as autumn leaves. When I'm gone, she begins. I start to protest. She raises a gentle hand. When I'm gone, keep doing small kindnesses. Finish other people's sentences with patience. Fill rooms with light, whether cedar-framed or heart-shaped. That's the promise. I rest my head on her shoulder. I'll keep it, Mom, every day. And teach her, she says, nodding, toward the dark house where Clara sleeps. Teach her the sound of a kettle that means home. A circle unbroken. The years that follow write their own chapters. Grace's sketch exhibit at the Art Center. My promotion to lead sustainable design. Consultant. Clara's first lemonade stand raising money for hip replacement patients. Like Gree-gra, she explains. Through successes and losses, one rhythm persists. The idea that love is not a static inheritance but a dynamic contract, renewed in each choice to nurture, to listen, to return. When Grace's time finally drifts in, quiet as tide at slack, water, she is in her own bed, teapot on the nightstand, lighthouse lamp circling a calm horizon outside. I sit beside her, compass ring cool against her palm, whispering lines from the travel essays she once loved. Her last breath is so gentle I almost mistake it for sleep. Afterward, I walk to the porch and switch on the light. It burns across Driftwood Lane, across decades, across every distance yet to come. The bulb hums softly, but what fills the air is her unending voice. Keep promising. Today I brew chamomile in the shoreline teapot, apple slices floating like tiny suns. Clara, now lanky, sits across from me, homework spilled between us. I set a fresh mug by her elbow. Thanks, Mom, she says, inhaling steam. Smells like Tidehaven. It smells like a promise, I reply. She lifts the compass pendant, her pendant now, and watches the arrow settle. Outside, gulls wheel above the pier. Inside, 3 generations of memory braid into one living tether. Heat rising from a cup, metal glinting at true north, and an ongoing promise that love, once poured, never truly cools. Great work today. Every moment you spend practicing brings you closer to mastering your English listening and speaking skills. Remember, progress comes with patience and consistency. If this story inspired you or helped you in your learning journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Easy English Spark channel for more lessons and stories. Keep listening, keep speaking, and keep believing in your growth. I'll see you in the next video. Take care and keep shining.